Hello everyone, this is Greg Tong with Management Roundtable. I'd like to welcome all of you to today's webinar, Doubling Speed to Market and New Product Profits, where today's discussion will focus on how simple constraints-based methods can accelerate growth. Our speaker today is Mike Dalton, who's the founder and managing director of the Guided Innovation Group located in Wisconsin. He's also the author of the book Simplifying Innovation, which is the first to apply theory of constraints to high-leverage innovation improvement. He comes to us with a background of many years in various executive leadership roles, including a former career with SC Johnson. Today, Mike will be leading us through several examples and a couple exercises illustrating how this constraints perspective can be applied to the process of product innovation. Before we begin, I do have a few quick housekeeping items I need to cover, so if I could just have your attention for a moment. For the best experience today, we do highly recommend that you install the Adobe Connect add-in to your computer. If you are viewing the webinar inside of a web browser, then that means you do not have the add-on installed. If you wish to install that add-on, you should see a phone icon in the upper toolbar of your browser screen. Just click on that and follow the prompts that say connect your computer, and you'll install the Adobe add-in. Once the program has concluded, we will be emailing to everyone a link to an online feedback form. We would appreciate it if you could take the time to fill that form out and let us know how we can improve our webinars. If you invited others to join you on this call that didn't register with us, we ask that you please forward that link to them so we can also get their feedback. As part of that process, you will also be getting a link to a copy of today's slides in PDF format and to a link to a recording of the session that you can share with others who weren't able to join us. We have set aside time at the end of today's session for questions and answers. You don't need to wait until we pause it later to ask your question. You can do so at any time, and we encourage you to submit your questions as soon as they come to mind to better ensure that they get addressed during the Q&A period. Just type your question into the webinar window that you see on your screen that is labeled Q&A, and we'll pick up on it later during the Q&A section. Please remember that if you have your slides expanded to full screen, you'll need to exit full screen mode to access the Q&A chat window and also to participate in some of the polls that we'll have coming up during today. Okay, it's time for us to begin with today's webinar with Mike Dalton. And Mike, I will now turn the call over to you.
All right, well, thanks very much, Greg, and glad to have everybody here today. You're here today because you count on new products to deliver some portion of your company's future growth. And I've consulted for companies across a broad range of industries, and a handful of frustrations come up again and again. So I'd really like to know what you think about these as we get started, about these issues as we get started. And Lisa's popped a poll up, so please take a moment here to have a look at the poll. And I just have to switch back to, as you will too, out of full screen mode. And so let's take a look at the results here. So we've got a number of folks, a good percentage of folks that are not seeing enough new products coming out. Number of folks, about 50%, seeing new products finishing late. 40% with innovation resource. Now we're back to 50 with innovation resources stretched too far. About 40% of the group with not getting early warning signs that programs are in trouble or ignoring them when they do get them, and a similar result in terms of new product programs not moving the needle. In that about 36 looks like about settled down at about 36%. So there we go. There we go. I think the poll should be down now. And okay, just having a little bit of technical problem here trying to get the slides to move. There we go. So while more profitable growth is the reason that most companies invest in new product innovation, these issues that we talked about really make it tough to deliver. And of course, that just creates a vicious circle where there's even more pressure on new products. And of course, you're the ones that bear the brunt of that pressure. So you're here today for some ideas on how you can get more new products to market in less time and without adding more cost or resources to your organization. And innovation is a process, and as such, it has a limiting or constraining step, what we call the bottleneck. Right? And no matter how much capacity I add at the other steps, our bottleneck is what constrains or controls the flow. Of course, I prefer to think of the bottleneck as a leverage point instead. And you can call me lazy, but I'm always looking for the most return for the least amount of effort. And quite simply, that's where it's going to be, at your constraint. So today I'm going to share several elements from the guided innovation system for debottlenecking your new product throughput. I'm also going to challenge some of the conventional wisdom that is obscuring some of your new product innovation capacity, and also creating an opportunity for you to unleash some hidden capacity. Now, in terms of constraints, conventional resource management and project management processes can be what we call a policy constraint. And that means that they actually act on your bottleneck to constrain or limit the output of your system, hiding or really, in a sense, robbing you of as much as 50% of your real capacity. Now, I know that's a bold statement to say 50%. So I want to start today by unpacking three key issues that with conventional resource management and project management practices that repeatedly show up as the root cause for new product innovation under-delivering on its promise. The first issue we're going to cover is multitasking. And people in your organization want to be responsive, but because organizations often can't tell the difference between busy and productive, people are actually encouraged to multitask. And we're going to take a look at why that's really such a problem. And now you might be saying, but Mike, everybody knows you have to multitask to survive these days. Right? It's even part of many job descriptions. Well, we're going to do a little time trial here to see how effective multitasking really is or isn't. Now, I want you to wait until I say go. But there are two lines here. One says rapid new product innovation, and the other is the alphabet from A to Z. And what we're going to do is write these down, right? So in order. So do the first project, writing rapid new product innovations, and then the second one, A through Z. Just one and then the other. And we're going to see how long that takes. So you'll have an on-screen timer. I'll count us down. You'll have an on-screen timer. And when you finish the first project, take a look just to see what the timer says. Try to remember that, and then go on to the next one and finish that. And we'll see how long it takes. So I'm going to count us down now. 2, 1, go. And it's probably going to take you somewhere around 15 to 20 seconds to finish the first task, and about the same to finish the second task. So you should be getting close to being done with the first one. And it looks like we're all right, and we'll call it about there. You should probably have all of them done. So we're going to move on, and instead we're going to try this with multitasking. Whoops. just need to go back there. Don't go yet on multitasking. I have to explain that. But so to multitask, what we're going to do is alternate between rows. So you're still going to write the two rows just the same. They're going to, when you're done, it's going to look exactly like it did before. But you're going to first write the R from the first line, then you're going to write the A from the second line, then back to the A from the first line, then back to the B from the second line, and so on until you finish both. And again, take a look at how long it ends up taking to do both, and write that down, and we'll take a look and try to compare how that worked. So I'm going to count us down. 3, 2, 1, go. Now this time it's probably going to take you somewhere around 30 to 40 seconds to do, I'm sorry, more like 60 to 120 seconds to finish both of the tasks. So you're probably nearing halfway done, maybe a little bit more than halfway done now. And we're probably getting to the point here where a couple of the fast movers are finishing up. And we're getting pretty close to where everybody should be finishing up. And when it gets to 120, where it is, we'll call it. So now what I'd like to do is Lisa's going to throw another poll up to show us how much longer it took with multitasking. So if it was 30, if it took you 15 seconds the first time and 30 seconds with multitasking so 30 seconds to finish both tasks and 60 seconds to finish both with multitasking, then it would be a 100% increase. So let's take a look at how that's looking, and I got to switch back out of full screen so we can take a look at the results. And we are seeing so pretty predominantly in the 80 to 90% longer, so and 90%. A couple of fast movers it only took 60 to 70% longer, but pretty close to double. Not exactly, but pretty darn close for a large percentage of the group, which is not unusual at all to see that kind of performance. And what you're seeing there, what was really happening was that the more projects you take on, the multitasking overhead, all the interruptions that you were having, they double the amount of effort required because of those switching costs and the multitasking overhead. And this chart really shows what's happening there. This is a study of engineers showing the percentage of value-added work goes down the more projects they're trying to juggle or the more plates they're trying to keep spinning at the same time. I think the other important thing is how did this feel for you? And maybe if you don't mind, maybe type into the chat window. And what did you experience while doing this? How would you describe that experience? And see what we can move the chat window around here. But so awkward, difficult, stress, absolutely. Anybody else? Those are some of the typical things we hear. I had to wait and think about it. Blech. More likely to make mistakes. Linda, good segue to our next slide, actually, because what you do see is that there we go. Is that not only when we multitask, not only does output suffer, but so does quality, and it becomes, again, it's back to that. It's a vicious circle where that rework becomes another source of work and stress, and it also becomes part of what in the software community they call it technical debt, right? It's the stuff that got done but didn't get done as well or completely as it should, and creates what more multitasking overhead in terms of technical debt. The second root issue I want to talk about is milestone and deadline thinking. And almost everyone has said to themselves, if people would just do their job and get their tasks finished when they're supposed to, our new products would launch on time. Right? But let me show you why that sort of thinking is almost never the case. It just doesn't work that way. Right? And so this is a PERT chart, or a version of a PERT chart with a series of tasks and durations attached to them. And at first glance, you'd look at this project and you'd say there appears to be 72 days worth of work here. But as with almost all plans, there is 50% or 36 days of padding hidden in this project. And if you're wondering where, it's at the individual task level. And that's because the estimates that are used for tasks are really probabilities. Right? We don't know whether a task is going to be done in 13 days exactly, but we may know that it's going to be done it'll be done in somewhere between 8 days and 16 days, so we'll call it 13 days. And so let's take a look at a simple example to understand why this happens, and also to see some of the harmful effects that has. So I want you to write down your estimate for how long it would take you to go and pick up a couple of coffees from Starbucks 2 miles away if there were no weather problems, traffic or parking problems, and there was no line when you got there. We call that the touch time. Now I'd like you to revise your estimate, assuming that we might run into rush hour traffic. If you're here in the Midwest where I am, you might run into snow, might be a long line at the drive-thru, and so I'd like you to revise your estimate, sort of take that into account. And then finally, I want you to revise your estimate again, assuming that your bonus this year is going to be based on beating that estimate. So basically giving an estimate that you know you can beat. And what you probably saw, we're not going to take a poll on this one, but what we normally see is that people build in a lot of waiting time, right? The median time, or the so-called touch time, might have been 20 minutes, let's say, right? But it's very likely that your second and third estimates were much further out, maybe 40 for your You maybe 30 to 40 for your first, that second estimate, and then once we tied the bonus to it, you probably went even further out. I wouldn't be surprised. And this is the way that task durations are modeled in conventional project approaches. But the question then becomes, well, if we put all that, if there really is all that padding in projects, then why doesn't it protect the due date? Why do so many projects still finish late? And there's really three reasons for that. But they're all driven by this idea of working to the deadline. And the first one is something called student syndrome, where if you know you have 5 days for a task, and you know that the touch time is let's say 3 days, then you know you don't need to start it for 2 days. And it's not that people aren't doing their job or that they're screwing around, right? It's that they have lots of other things to work on, so they prioritize those things over that task, and they wait and they start it after 3 days. Now you think, well, that's fine. The task should still finish on time. The problem is that what if it doesn't go perfectly, right? That 2 days was built in not so that we could do other things. The 2 days, usually it's defended for, well, I don't know everything that's going to be, I might run into on the task. So we still may run into problems while doing the task, and that's the problem is that the student syndrome leaves the task, the task time unprotected because we procrastinated 2 days, 2 or 3 days away at the beginning, working on something else. Now, there are folks who are the opposite, right? They start everything immediately, get it done. However, they still may not pass the task forward because they want to continue working on it and get it perfect. Even though they've got a good enough solution, a workable solution, they may still engage in what we call unnecessary perfectionism or apple polishing. And then the last piece is oftentimes the tasks in projects are negotiated times. I say it's going to take 10 days. You say, no, I think I can get it done in 5. And we go back and forth and we end up with 7 days. And if everything goes perfectly and I get it done in 5, maybe even 4 days, what are the chances that I'm going to hand it in early? Because if I do, then next time I know I'm not going to get that padding, and it doesn't always go perfectly. So I'm going to be protective of that. And so sandbagging, but it happens. The third area I want to talk about really brings in the idea of multiple projects working at the same time. And up until now, we've been talking all about single projects, right? But in the real world, most projects have to compete for resources and for priority. So the third and final root cause we're going to address is starting too many projects for the resources that you have available. And I want to do that with an example here. And in the example, we have 4 projects that need resources. And Lisa popped up a poll, so again, you'll need to go out of full screen mode if you are. But we got another poll. But there are 4 projects that need resources. Right? They're all for important customers. Each has a very influential sponsor inside your company that's pushing to start their project as soon as possible. And from a financial standpoint, equally attractive. And if you can put your entire team on one project, they can complete that project in 3 months. And so the question we want to take a look at here is what would your company do? And we're at 100% start them all. So actually, I usually get a couple of hands for running them one at a time. So but usually no more than 1 or 2. So we try to meet the demand by starting all of them. And it's very typical for organizations to work that way. And there we go. So I want to show what happens when we do that, right? If we only start, but we'll start by showing what happens if we only do one project at a time. And which we call pipelining for full speed or resourcing for full speed. If we put all the resources needed to run the project at full speed, right, it's done in 3 months. And then the second project is done after 6 months. And now both projects are delivering cash flow. And then the third project, and then the fourth project. So after a year, we've gotten all 4 projects done. And some of them were delivering cash flow much earlier, but they all got done within the same amount of time. They all got done within the year. Then let's take a look at what happens if we start all 4 projects immediately, right? Well, what typically happens is we work a little bit on the blue, then we wait, then we work a little on the red, wait, orange, wait, green, wait, right? And we do that throughout the life of the project. It wouldn't look nearly this neat. It'd be a lot messier. But basically, what happens is that all 4 projects still finish at the end of the year, but none of them has been able to generate cash flow throughout that year. And what you see is that most of the project, the dominant element of the project's duration actually becomes waiting time. The project spends more time waiting for resources, primarily resources in this case, versus actually getting work done. And that really has a negative effect. However, the multitasking that we saw makes this problem even much worse, right? Because the added resource inefficiency means that the projects are going to actually take about 50% longer than they did before. So it's more like, it's really, what we're going to see is it's going to take more like 18 months to finish those projects when we add in the multitasking, the negative elements from multitasking, which means that we can get 6 projects done in that same time. And again, take a look at the difference in cash flow. You lose that compounding cash flow effect when you work this way. And so again, earlier I mentioned that this is where that we were losing up to 50% of innovation productivity because of a couple of key issues, and this is really how it ends up looking at the end, right? With multitasking overhead and rework being a big piece of it, waiting on decisions being a piece of it, waiting on resources being a piece, and bad projects. Some of the projects just shouldn't have made it into the portfolio either. So that's really where a big chunk of the negatives that where the waste that we see ends up. So now that we've seen the negative impact of some of these 3 root causes, what can you do to eliminate them? Well, obviously, we're not going to be able to be comprehensive in a webinar format like this, but today I can unpack a few elements of the guided innovation system and some principles that can make a big difference in your innovation speed, throughput, and predictability or on-time performance for projects, for new product projects. And it all starts with relay racer execution, what we call relay racer execution. And a relay race, a relay racer has several defining characteristics, right? Instead of working to a particular date, a handoff date, relay racers move as fast as possible for the condition of the track. They don't stop for interruptions or other tasks. They hand off the task as early as possible. They hand off to a waiting runner, who then takes off running right away, so that everything just continues to move. Again, getting rid of that wait time we talked about earlier. Right? So hopefully you can see how that maps to the new product projects. Now what I want to do is dive into some of the tools that support that relay racer culture and make it possible to actually run the relay race. So the first step is limiting entrance of projects into your pipeline using a firewall. It was Peter Drucker who said that there's nothing so useless as doing efficiently that which should not be done at all. And this chart really shows that, because on the left-hand side, you see the average performers in an industry canceling about almost 20% of projects after they've gotten engineering resources. Whereas if you look at the top 20% of performers, they're only canceling about 1% of projects after they've gotten use of constrained resources. Now, the key thing here is that both start with the same number of projects and cancel the same number of projects. The top performers, or at least on a percentage basis, the top performers, they end up canceling the losing projects much earlier. They weed out the losers early, and by doing that, it's obviously more productive, but it also has another benefit, which is that it doesn't put as much pressure on the pipeline. If I can pull that 20% of projects out of the pipeline early, then I don't have as much pressure on my pipeline, and I get much better visibility into what's going on. And part of the way that they do that they weed out projects, is looking for fatal flaws in terms of what I call the big five feasibilities. Right? And so that's commercial value, technical feasibility, manufacturability, regulatory compliance, IP, and freedom, and from an intellectual property standpoint here, we're talking about freedom to operate, not about patentability. Not that patentability isn't important, but from a feasibility standpoint, we want to make sure that we're not going to be blocked to actually sell the new product innovation that we bring out. And if you really want to run the relay race, another really critical tool is something called critical chain project management. That's really the project management and resource management tool that I recommend, and it's definitely a constraints-based approach. Now, critical chain is related to critical path, which I'm sure many of you have heard of, but with some hugely important differences. And while I don't want to go all project management wonky on you here about the differences, but I do need to cover just a couple of things. The first thing is that the critical chain is the longest sequence of tasks in a project, taking into account both task and resource dependency. Now, if you're familiar with the critical path does not take resource dependency into account. There is something called resource leveling, but it's not really the same thing in terms of the project network that it creates. And the really important thing here is that the critical chain ends up being the project's constraint. Right? We can't shorten the duration of a project without shortening the length of tasks on the critical chain or taking tasks off of the critical chain. That's the only, if it's not on the critical chain, then it isn't going to, then taking time out of it isn't really going to save us, or putting additional resources towards it isn't going to save us any time. Right? And so to help further explain the critical chain, if in this example, the critical chain, the critical path, which is 13 to 12 to 18, is really an unrealistic expectation, because it turns out that, give you a little bit more information here, that the blue and the red resources, we only have one of them, so they really can't happen at the same time. So what we do then is critical chain removes the planned multitasking by staggering those constrained tasks, right? And that means that we take out the planned multitasking so that it doesn't become a negative a negative surprise later on during the project. But the most important difference in using critical chain is something we call the project buffer. Because instead of trying to optimize tasks to a deadline by filling the tasks full of padding, we focus on protecting the project due date. Right? And we do that with a single global project buffer placed at the end of the project that really ends up acting like a shock absorber and protects the due date from unexpected problems, Murphy's Law events, things that, or even just having to wait for resources that might be being used on other projects. Now, of course, you're probably at this point going to say, yeah, Mike, right. So where in the heck does the buffer come from? Because it's not like anyone's going to just let me add resources or time at the end of a project. That's the first thing that they're going to want to cut is that time at the end of the project. So let me show you where that time comes from. And the way that we get that time is by stripping out the task by stripping the task durations down to the bare essential touch time. Essentially, what we're doing here is removing the padding that we saw in the Starbucks example. Right? We're going to take that padding out. Then, and usually people get really nervous when you start talking about taking all that padding out. So you have to make sure that they understand that we're going to add padding back at the end. But the thing here is that we actually only have to put about half of the time back about half of the padding back at the end of the project, right? Because with a traditional deadline focus, right, the thing that we saw was that task delays accumulated while early finishes evaporated. With this approach, we really only need about half the buffer, or the buffer only needs to be half of the padding that was there originally, because the relay racer execution approach allows us to take advantage of early finishes, which then offset some of the late ones. And it ends up statistically going down. It's more complicated than that, but a great rule of thumb is about half of the padding. And what that allows us to do is reduce the planned duration of the project by 25%. And you might look at 25% and say, well, that's not half. That doesn't sound that great. But the actual effect is much larger because we greatly reduce the probability of schedule overruns to less than 10%. Versus today, where they're probably going to be more like an 80% chance of overrun. That's a pretty typical 80% of projects finish late, 50% finish more than I think it's around 50% late. So a pretty good chance the project's going to be late with traditional execution. But so the difference is even larger than it really looks or would look. The buffer also helps you visualize, excuse me, the real status of the project, right? Because we get this early warning by plotting buffer consumption on the vertical, right? That's how much of the buffer we've used up, versus on the horizontal, we're looking at how much with a single project, how much of the critical chain have we completed, right? And anytime the project starts to track above that 45-degree line that you can just barely see on there. But anytime it starts tracking above that, it's time to take action. And even as you're approaching that line, the project team is doing some planning to to take action to recover some buffer and get the project, get some tasks done sooner, so that we bring the project in on time. So it's a great visualization that really helps everybody see what's going on in really going on in the project. And so again, moving back to the challenge that we talked about with multiple projects, right? Because that's where, in the real world, we live with multiple projects. So if you're unfamiliar, or if you're familiar with the on-ramp controls used to meter traffic onto a busy highway, the critical chain answer to managing for your available resource bandwidth is a very similar approach, where we meter in projects at a pace that doesn't delay any of the projects already underway. And the way we do that is by staggering the start dates of new projects based on the work required and the bandwidth available. Right? And so the start dates of each of the projects end up being staggered, so that our so-called drum resource sets the pace and it's never overloaded. And the result is a project portfolio that's tuned to deliver the highest number of completed projects possible. Right? And this may seem counterintuitive, but we actually finish more projects by starting fewer. And certainly by starting fewer at the same time. Now again, still talking about the multi-project world, the buffer also helps us to synchronize shared resources, right? There are almost always shared resources, even if you have people singly assigned to a project team. They only work on one project. There are still some shared resources, things like testing, pilot plants, all those sorts of parts of the organization that end up being a shared resource. So you have to decide between how a project, if two projects need a resource at the same time, you have to decide how do I determine which project should get the resource, right? And the official answer to that question is always, oh, well, we do it based on priorities. But the reality is that it's usually based on influence, right? It's either who's the squeakiest wheel, or the other wheel is the big wheel, right? Who has the most organizational clout, so their project gets done. Of course, I've also seen it work with which project manager buys the most pizza and donuts. The pizza and donuts one works sometimes too. And in fact, right now I'm working with a client where their project managers are expected to show influence and wield influence to be able to make sure their project gets done. And it's actually distorted their portfolio to a point where the number one project is getting less resources than the number two and the number four, and is a real mismatch between which projects are getting the resources, and that's all. It's all because influence is used today. The critical chain solution is to look at the which project is going to be late if we don't prioritize it. So if you look at, hopefully you can see the red, the dot up here in the red, this project, if it and this project both needed resources, the same resource, the priority should go here because it's most at risk of finishing late. Right? And a final comment on critical chain. There was a recent study by Kendall and Austin that found that critical chain showed the really positive impact that critical chain has had. I think you can see it here. Dramatically reduced project durations, more projects completed, higher dollar throughput. And this was a study including some pretty big companies like Boeing, Siemens, Tata Steel, Ericsson, P&G, ABB, and Rio Tinto Alcan. They all so they really saw great result, have seen great results with critical chain. And then you might ask, well, then why isn't everybody switching away from conventional approaches? And the status quo is certainly a factor, but I also think that most organizations want quick, easy fixes, but lasting change has to address systems and culture, and that's really what the Guided Innovation System was created for, and so this shows all the different elements. I've shared a handful of those with you today, and after we take some questions, I'll offer some free resources that can help support you in this effort. And we're also going to be discussing with, and have been discussing with, Management Roundtable a longer format version of this. And Management Roundtable, they'll be in contact if and when that with you if and when that comes to fruition. So at this point, we're going to open it up for questions. We've got about 15 minutes left here, so I've got time for about 10 minutes available for questions. And so, Greg or Lisa?
Just a reminder to ask your question. Just go ahead and type it in the box labeled Q&A that you'll see on your screen there, and then we'll address that question over to Mike. Mike, I'll start off. In your experience, how long does it take, you think, to get an organization up to speed if they wanted to approach their project this way and change up their culture?
So there's kind of two elements to that question, Greg. You can actually make a pretty big impact in just a couple of months. The challenge, though, is that if it's sort of a one-time pop, and then you go back to the old approach, that's not really beneficial. So what most change projects take about a year to really see it become embedded as part of the culture. So the good news, though, is that with critical chain, and particularly with focusing in on less projects and doing some of that piece as part of the early part of critical chain, you really see a quick pop in results. Like 6 weeks to 2 months, you can begin to see some good results. It takes more like a year, though, to make it a more permanent part and address the systems and make it really embedded in the culture.
Is it easier to accomplish if you're, let's say, the manufacturing arm of the company is implementing different types of theory of constraints methods and what they're doing as well?
I think if there are other folks in the organization that understand critical chain, it can make it easier. But we've implemented this in companies that don't use critical chain in manufacturing and haven't chosen to, and they still see results. So significant results. One company that's had a long-term change from projects that it had expanded to almost 36 months, brought them down to they were about anywhere between 24 and 36 months. Now they're 10 to 16 months on project duration, getting a lot more projects done, and for years they've managed to maintain that, even though they don't do anything with it on the manufacturing side.
Now, theory of constraints is something that's been around, a while. It goes up and down in terms of people's awareness. Where would you think today in general industry, where you think people's awareness of theory of constraints methods?
I think theory of constraints and methodology is actually on the upswing right now because of something called that you may be aware of, called TLS, which is Theory of Constraints Lean Six Sigma, and what a very large electronics firm actually put TOC. They divided up their plants, and they did 1/3 on TOC as a focusing mechanism for Lean and Six Sigma, 1/3 on Lean, 1/3 on Six Sigma, and of those plants, 80% of, and that's really what TOC is. It's a mechanism that helps you identify where you're going to get that leverage. And so TLS has started, I think, has sort of started a resurgence of TOC in my view.
I see a question from someone asking if the presentation is going to be available for later. We did go over this earlier, but I'll just remind everyone you'll get a email from us that have a link to an online feedback form. And as part of that, once you complete the form or bypass the form, you will get a link to a copy of a PDF version of the slides used today and a link to a recorded version of today's session. Again, if you do have any questions, just type them into the Q&A window. Mike, I don't see any coming in as yet. I know someone might come in as we speak, but I don't know if you want to go on to the next segment as we wait and see if any other questions come out.
Yeah, sounds good, and we can always take questions at the end. Happy to take questions at the end, and in fact, I think Lisa's going to throw another poll up here. One of the things is I know that people aren't always.
Mike, I'm sorry, we do have a number of questions. They were hidden from my view for a minute, but why don't we get those? We do have them.
Okay.
Someone is asking, why two is better than one project?
Why? Well, yeah, I think that you have to keep in mind that data is from a perspective of a company that's not running the relay race, but essentially when people aren't blocked on one project, having a second project, or when they get blocked on one project, having a second project to go to, it gives them something to do. As they start getting more projects, though, then the juggling starts to become a problem. Running the relay race, though, is really about having one project that you're working on that day, that time. Not that people only work on necessarily one project at a time, but they're focused in for that period. It's the idea of finishing a task. That's the really important thing. But yeah, good question. That slide usually does bring up that question. So.
Okay. Another question from someone is asking, are there common organizational cultural barriers that you expect when trying these things?
Yeah, I think you run into a number of different barriers. One is just I find that people can be sometimes on two ends of the extreme, two ends of the spectrum. Either they don't want to do project planning at all, and Critical Chain takes good project planning, or they want to jump to this very, very too detailed project planning. And it's funny, you talk to a company that's doing projects that take 2 years, and when you tell them that people need to spend a week, a team needs to spend 3 to 5 days, perhaps, putting not the entire project team, but at least a good cross-functional cut of people need to spend a couple of days on building a good project network and understanding what really has to happen for all the tasks to get done. People get a little. It's funny. People will push back on that. Well, we can't have people spend that kind of time, but they're okay having the project take 2 years, right? Versus we can shorten it significantly with just a couple of days investment. But it's amazing. Just getting over that is one element, and so you also have to do a little bit of training on these concepts. People have to. The way I always like to say it is you have to lead people. You have to lead people to a solution instead of leading with the solution. So to try to go in and just sell the solution doesn't work. You've got to let them experience some of these things for themselves. And we use exercises to do that, to help people understand, exercises like that multitasking exercise and a bunch of others that help them understand and get past some of those cultural obstacles.
All right, Mike, next question from Mike Wilps from Goodyear. He's asking, how do you manage the wide variability of scope and required resources needed across a full portfolio of new product development projects?
Software. Quite simply, when you get into wide projects, and I'm saying that only partly, I'm joking a little bit, but no, it does require software for sure. The other piece is that oftentimes we make the mistake of putting new product projects and maintenance projects in the same pipeline, and that's doable, but it can create confusion. I typically like the idea of I talked about firewalling at the front end of the pipeline. I actually like to firewall the NPD pipeline from sort of the tactical, sustaining maintenance work that most organizations have to do, maintenance project work that new product organizations end up doing, or the small, fast turn projects, a separate pipeline for those and managing them with different resources. Because I also, in my experience, I've found that there are people that are really good at that fast turn stuff that is pretty predictable. You know what it's kind of turning the crank, and they're really good at that. There are other people that are much better at the long-term stuff that is a little it takes a different kind of mindset. So,
is there any specific software you would recommend, Mike?
I'm big on Exapron. If you and there's some information on that on my website at guidedinnovation.com. Some examples using it. But I'm big on it because it is a web-based tool and doesn't require a lot. You don't have to buy software to put on servers. But there are some other good ones too. ProChain and Concerto are the other big folks out there. So.
There is a new piece of software I heard of. It's brand new that has a lot of critical chain built into it as a method for their project management. It's called Playbook. You might want to Google it. It's just a brand new thing I've heard of.
Wow. Are you sure it's not Critical Path, though?
No, it's a brand new. And you do, we'll cut off the questions here for now. We'll have opportunity for you to access Mike with other questions as well. We'll get to that later, but I believe we want to have a final segment we want to close out with.
Absolutely. Great. Thanks, Greg. And like I said, definitely at the end and take more questions. As long as the good folks here at Management Roundtable leave the lights on, I'll stick around and take questions. The other thing I wanted to mention is that if anybody, and Lisa's going to pop a poll up for this, if anybody wants, I'm going to, because I know sometimes people don't want to ask questions in a group setting like this, so I'll make myself available for the rest of I'll be in my office for the rest of the afternoon to take questions that you might have, either phone call or email, and my email will be coming up here. But I'll be around, and if you're interested, just let me know, and if there's enough folks, then I'll stick around and won't and make myself available for that. So, okay. Some of the obstacles you face. But we also agreed on the need, despite those obstacles, to find a way to deliver great new products in less time. And so I hope today's session has helped you see how much hidden capacity there could be in your organization, and hidden capacity that can dramatically increase your speed to market if you can uncover it and begin using it, and particularly the kind of impact that can have on your new products and your company's growth. Now, I mentioned that I have a couple of resources available. First off, we've got the Speed to Market forum available on LinkedIn, as well as if you go on iTunes, you can find I've got Speed to Market Radio, which is my podcast, and talking about different speed to market and innovation throughput issues. Also, if I think everybody probably knows my book's available on Amazon in Kindle or hard copy, but also if you'd like a free executive summary of the book, which is available in either PDF or MP3, actually you get both format. It's about a 10-page summary, has a pretty including a pretty complete explanation of critical chain. Just send me an email, and you can send it to info@guidedinnovation.com, and I will make sure that you get a copy of that book summary. And then the last thing I wanted to mention here is that that I offer a free leadership strategy session that really is intended to help your organization see if it's ready to challenge the status quo and uncover some of that hidden innovation capacity. And if that's something you're interested in, you can visit my website at guidedinnovation.com/fast track. It's 2 T's in fast track. You know that it's easy to leave that one out. So, or again, you can send me an email, or the phone number is on there as well. In fact, and the phone number there, 262-672-2700. Again, like I said before, if anybody wants to call with questions, I'll be around for the afternoon, or you can email as well. And this last slide here just has that my email and phone information. So thank you very much. It's been great. I will, like I said, I'll stick around as long as the great folks here at Management Roundtable keep the lights on if anybody has additional questions.
For those of you that need to leave, thank you for joining us. Thank you, Mike, for your time as well. We will stick around for a little if anyone wants to type in additional questions. We do have some leftover questions in the queue that we can get to as well. And then once that's done, again, remember that Mike has his contact information up on the screen right now if you want to follow up with him, after we're done here as well. So, Mike, there was one leftover question from Linda, and she's asking, any suggestions on how to get upper management to believe in pipelining projects. She says, I think the single biggest factor in improving development output, hard to get everyone to believe.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, the multitasking exercise, there's also an exercise where that I use in a longer format session, where it's similar to what you saw on showing the pipeline effect, but we actually do a little exercise where we run a new project organization, and just period after period, we keep putting more projects in, more projects than you have the bandwidth for, right? So let's say you have bandwidth to be able to run 4 projects or 5 projects, whatever it is, and each period we put in more than 5 projects. We put in more projects than we have the ability to run. What starts happening is, the projects all start moving, and you divide the resources across them. They all start moving a little bit slowly, and that's an exercise that really gives the leadership team, sort of they watch period after period, the cycle time starts to increase, and in about a year and a half simulation, the time increases to for a typical project that might take 6 months, it increases to something like a year and a half to 2 years. I mean, it really very dramatic.
Okay, and someone else is asking, should R&D start a new project while prior project is not released to market yet, most likely requiring some engineering time to finish?
Yeah, the thing is, it's all based on the amount of resource that you're going to need, and if usually projects run in phases, so you can overlap projects. If you noticed on the one chart where I showed the staggering between projects, those projects actually overlapped each other a little bit, which is kind of normal. What you don't want to have happen, though, is I don't want to get to a situation where I have a team where I have my R&D resources bringing two projects to the market at the same time. If I'm doing one phase of a project, if I'm in one phase on one project and in another phase on the other project, that's usually more manageable. And tools like Exapron that I talked about, the software, really sort of that's the way they work. By modeling resources, it sort of helps you manage that piece. The other really good practice is to make sure that the support people are brought in early. The people that are going to have to support the product once it's in the market, if they're brought in earlier into the project, then they learn what's going on, and then it doesn't always have to go back to the chief research engineer or scientist or maybe maybe they don't have to get as involved because you've got that support person out there as a firewall when the product gets to market.
Okay, and next, someone's wondering, for a project that usually involves a waiting time, for example, for procurement, why not use that time for the next project?
Yeah, and in fact, if you model the project that way, with that waiting time in it, that'll happen, right? As I talked about before with the staggering, stagger doesn't mean we don't start one project till another's finished. It means we stagger it so that they're not using the same resources at the same time. Yeah, so you can take advantage of those kinds of things if you know that, if you know that it's 3 months. For procurement, another example would be, in drug development or almost anything that requires FDA approval, there's usually something like a 90-day waiting period, and having people sitting on their hands for 90 days doesn't make sense. That's not, and when you model the project, that you'll find that you can do other things. The key thing in relay racer behavior doesn't mean people can't work on multiple projects. It means that they're only working on one task at a time. And what's important there, and I didn't really mention it, but it's probably worth mentioning, is tasks are not months long. Tasks should be a couple of days, right? Maybe 3 days, a day to 3 days, maybe 5 days at the most. You don't want to model tasks, because if you get model tasks that are a month long, they really are milestones, right? They're get product prototype ready. Well, there may be 10 tasks to get the product prototype ready, or 10 things you have to do that take a couple of days each. So you really need a little bit more granularity, not micromanaging, but a little bit more granularity.
All right, Mike, and this looks like the final question in our queue. And someone's asking, can you provide a link to references to the results study that you presented towards the end of the webinar?
I'm trying to think if there's a link. I can tell the study is by Kendall and Austin in a book called Advanced Multi-Project Management. Jerry Kendall, Kathleen Austin, really sharp folks. And the link is, and the study was they actually did the study went through all the literature and included it as part of their excellent book.
All right, well, we've gotten through our question backlog, so I guess we will end here.
All right.
Remember, you can follow up with Mike at the contact information you see on your screen if you have any additional issues, questions, or other things you want to bring up with him. Thank all of you for joining us today. As I mentioned, don't forget, keep your eye on your inbox for our follow-up email that will take you to our evaluation form and also a link to a downloadable version of today's slides and a recordable version of today's session. So thank you all for joining us. Have a great rest of your day, and hope to see you again at the next Management Roundtable. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Lisa. And thanks, everyone, for listening and sticking around.